Signal to 3. Terrorism is defined in the Code of Federal Regulations as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, a civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. Insurrection is defined as a rebellion of citizens or subjects of a country against its government. Sedition is defined as conduct or speech inciting people to rebel against the authority of a state or a monarch. Treason is defined as the crime of betraying one's country, as especially by attempting to kill the sovereign or overthrow the government. I think it's well past time we find out who's organizing these terrorist attacks on our cities and conduct day and night raids until they are all arrested on federal charges to stand trial for treason, terrorism, and attempting to overthrow the government of the United States of America. This is the beginning, the kinetic beginning of a communist revolution, and if we stand by, it will only get worse as these traitors will become even more emboldened. The following are from Fort Observer. The Los Angeles Black Coyote Collective. The Los Angeles Black Coyote Collective, an armed leftist group, urged rioters to leave their cell phones at home to prevent self-incrimination and implicating other conspirators. In an attempt to control the narrative, however, the group potentially revealed that bail funding and legal aid networks are being increasingly spread thin. On Twitter, the group stated, quote, "Herd immunity applies to federal conspiracy charges as much as it applies to the flu," end quote. Oh, pardon me. "Don't be the idiot who gets friends arrested or worse," end quote. The Los Angeles Black Coyote Collective also mentioned that bail funding and legal aid networks such as the National Lawyers Guild, or the NLG, quote, "are spread thin already," end quote. Observers note, the far left is diligent about maintaining the narrative that they are only on the defensive against those on the right and law enforcement. They also maintain only the flow of beneficial information and ensure their propaganda is being properly broadcasted with selected sympathetic journalists. This recent call for a cellular restraint, however, potentially reveals that the mechanisms returning insurgents to the streets night after night might be overburdened. The recent wave of federal riot charges, FBI investigations, and deputizing of state law enforcement could be dealing a blow to the insurgency's logistical support network of legal aid and bail funding. The far left is potentially struggling to maintain lasting insurgent uprisings outside of the Pacific Northwest. The riots in Kenosha and Rochester escalated rapidly, but were short-lived relative to the ongoing insurgency in Portland and Seattle. The recent Revolutionary Abolitionist Movement, or RAM-led riot in New York City also failed to spark a new wave of decentralized riots. They are failing to recruit the masses that experienced a larger amount of popular support following the death of Floyd, calling for racial justice. Flare-ups are likely to continue erupting in various cities amid heightened racial tensions, but it is possible the insurgency could largely be contained to Washington and Oregon until we draw closer to Election Day. Many pundits and politicians are raising questions over who is funding the ongoing riots across the country. An answer comes from far-left activist Shane Becker, who has currently raised $35,581 as of this writing, toward the goal of $50,000 towards the purchase of ballistic-rated vests in Portland, Oregon. In a previous effort this summer, Becker raised over $9,000 for gas masks, umbrellas, and leaf blowers. quote, and other self-defense items, end quote. On the campaign's GoFundMe page, Becker wrote, Portland is under attack by fascists, white supremacists, nationalists, and militias. They always have guns, end quote. YouTube creator, Tactical Girlfriend, posted a new instructional video on how to purchase a firearm for first-time buyers. The video creator partnered with the Puget Sound John Brown Gun Club this year, producing training content on trauma medicine, ham radios, concealed carry, and basic firearms handling. Observer note, armed groups such as the Socialist Rifle Association and the John Brown Gun Club will likely see an increase in membership with more leftists purchasing firearms. First-time buyers seeking instruction and advice can be further radicalized in socialist and far-left ideology. Far-left bloggers on It's Going Down called for collaboration among anti-fascist, abolitionist, and anarchist groups to ensure that the movement achieves insurrection. The Post stressed groups to establish a rhythm and consistency to disruptive operations, such as France's Yellow Vest movement operating every Saturday. They claimed that this would eliminate the need for groups to constantly call for individual events and rebuild momentum. In addition, they urged far-left revolutionaries to extend their struggle, quote, to the hood, end quote, and to more broadly appeal to, quote, the black proletariat, end quote, to reignite the level of destruction witnessed earlier in the year. Democrats could reject another Trump victory. Shadi Hamid, senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, warned that if President Trump is reelected, there will be, quote, mass disillusion, end quote, on the left, with more social unrest and violence. Hamid claimed that Democrats have largely not come to terms with the 2016 election, and another loss in the Electoral College will lead to a drop in support for the electoral process. More leftists could be convinced that the system is rigged and realign with more radical revolutionary elements of the far left. Portland insurgency experiences funding shutdowns. Several far-left groups fundraising for material support had their Cash App and Venmo accounts shut down over the weekend. PDX Shieldsmiths, an anti-fascist group that acquired helmets, gas masks, and a bus for rioters, had their Cash App account shut down due to terms violations. Another group, Safe PDX, warned followers on Twitter to avoid using certain verbiage such as, quote, BLM, end quote, or, quote, ACAB, end quote, when contributing online to ensure their account is not closed down. Observers note, far-left groups often have multiple accounts to fund their efforts and extensively solicit donations on social media accounts. These recent account shutdowns and suspensions can temporarily slow their funding, but these groups will likely find other ways to fund their operations. Tensions build for upcoming Portland rally. Groups on both the left and the right have increased calls for support for the upcoming rally in Portland on 26 September 2020. On Telegram, the Proud Boys said, quote, come with us to Portland and tell our enemies that they may take our lives, but they'll never take our freedom, end quote. On Twitter, Alan Swinney, seen pointing a handgun during a clash with far-left protesters in Portland on 22 August 2020, said, they thought the 22nd was rough, the 26th will be tenfold. Several far-left groups such as the Pacific Northwest Resistance, or the PNWR, Popular Mobilization, Rose City Antifa, and the Pacific Northwest Youth Liberation Front have organized counter-protests. PNWR said in Twitter, "Portland, it's going to be 2017 all over again. Let's show these chuds from all over the country they don't belong in Portland." Observers note, individuals on both sides may be seeking revenge for the death of Proud Boy and Aaron Danielson at the event on the 26th of August, 2020, and for the death of Antifa member Michael Reinoehl on the 3rd of September, 2020. Neither side has publicly called for open violence, but the potential is higher with an increased amount of armed groups at these rallies. In addition, groups across the country, such as American Patriots USA in Georgia, are planning to attend the event. Mutual aid camp established in Portland. Mutual aid group Equitable Workers Offering Community Support, or EWOCS, is collaborating with other far-left groups and is establishing the Mutual Aid Lloyd Theater, or MALT, in downtown Portland. The camp is a collection and distribution point for food, medical supplies, electronics, camping gear, and clothing. Far-left propaganda and recently published 40 Ways to Fight Fascists guide are also being distributed at the camp, observers note. Far-left groups are taking advantage of the wildfires to expand mutual aid networks to bolster their support and undermine local government. Mutual aid hubs, such as MALT, could allow the insurgency to establish durable logistical networks and community connections. In addition, mutual aid hubs are a prime opportunity to directly distribute propaganda and recruit more supporters. Far-left journalist calls for a coordinated inundation of criminal courts. Ella Fassler of The Nation and Truth Out called for those charged during the ongoing far-left riots and violent protests to simultaneously go to trial in an attempt to overwhelm the criminal justice system. On Twitter, Fassler wrote, "There needs to be mass coordination between the tens of thousands of people facing charges from the ongoing rebellion. The system is designed for plea deals. It can't handle taking everyone to trial," unquote. Fassler bragged about being previously charged with 7 felonies and stressed the pandemic was the perfect opportunity to overwhelm the courts. Observers note, insurgents seek to purposefully overwhelm the criminal justice system to destroy the confidence of officials, trying to maintain control and reduce the government's coercive power. In a recent Gallup poll, 74% of Americans only had some to very little confidence in the criminal justice system. Inundated courts would also serve to diminish popular support for the criminal justice system. So from Lunchbox, Optic, instability is in, peaceable order is threatened. Preparation and training for hard times is on everyone's mind, or most minds, given the shadow cast by events this year. Many think they're ready to defend what's theirs, but I've never really given the true consideration of what that means. For instance, when is the last time you stood in 40 pounds of kit? All day in the elements, where you live on post, guarding what you love or have been hired to protect? No, you've not done that. You've not had your feet feel like they want to fall off. You haven't stood wet and freezing for a 12-hour shift. You haven't considered the 80% or more of what your battle rattle is comprised of is just useless weight you're carrying around. Spend a week on your feet pulling 12-hour rotations and all your cool guy gear and get back to me about how really ready for a fight and ready for what's coming you really are. You think you're hard because of your $1,800 rifle is the bomb, and your plate carrier must be the shit with those AR-500 level 4 plates. Do a gut check now. Figure it out or pay for it when it counts. From the Howling Void, We share ancestry with every living being on the planet. You might be anxious to speak, panic when late, feel too tired to even take out the trash, but you've been treating a Ferrari like a moped. Humans emerged victorious from an evolutionary bottleneck of hundreds of thousands of years of inter-hominid cannibalistic wars with Neanderthals. We occupied the plains shoulder to shoulder with mega predators like the saber-toothed lions, the mountains with cave bears. And during an ice age that lasted longer than written language has, we secured our future against these man-eaters. Your ability to derive energy from matter, to flex and move, to propel yourself forward, to problem solve, are of a level of subtlety and efficiency far ahead of anything we've ever engineered. You are the ultimate engine, released from 4.5 billion years of R&D, honed by every extinction level pressure Earth has offered. You inherit a future your ancestors bought with an untold chain of lives and cold, starvation, and rape, and plague, and thirst, and exertion, and pain, and sacrifice going back through eons of collapsing civilizations back to the caves. You inherit a future glistening with more glittering potential than they could comprehend, beyond their imagining. You are capable. What are you going to do? And as a writer to the contribution from the Howling Void, this came across my feed. Kind of thought it fit. Capable people are those who sit worrying about the future. The unwise are those who worry about nothing. If conflicts get resolved before they became acute, there wouldn't be any heroes. That's from Wang Qishan, from Principles, 2017. Lastly, remember the other day about 2 National Guard air crews rescuing almost 200 people? Well, President Trump just presented all 7 crew members with the Distinguished Flying Cross. The crews were told to turn back, but they refused. So, over the next 48 hours and 3 attempts, the crews saved an additional 50 civilians under similar circumstances. Again, they were told to abort the mission, and again, they refused. The Chinook crew members are Chief Warrant Officer Joseph Rosamond, the pilot in command, Chief Warrant Officer Brady Hlabane, and Sergeants George Esquivel and Cameron Powell. The Black Hawk crew members are Chief Warrant Officers Kip Godding and Irvin Hernandez, and Warrant Officer Ge Jiang. Congratulations and thank you. Signal 2-3.